I hope you can hear me now. Okay, now I'm getting the feedback that everyone can hear me, so I think now I can get it started. So in today's discussion, we are going to talk about the PTE scoring criteria, and we'll be starting from speaking. Then I'll talk about reading, writing, reading, and listening at the end. And if you have any concerns, queries, you can write in the chat, and then I'll try to answer those questions as well. And at the end, for 15 to 20 minutes, I'll wait for everyone's questions if you cannot ask questions when I'm going on. So PTE scoring has been quite mysterious for many of us, and the reason for that is the way it works is not fully explained by Pearson, and they have not released their algorithm to the public. The only thing we know is how individual scoring is done for each type of question. But the confusion here is because this is an integrated test, and while you are doing speaking, you are being evaluated for reading at the same time, for listening at the same time, and while doing writing, the same thing happens. Many of us have confusion about how it is actually done and how does the score uh, go to different sections, how they distribute the score across different sections. And that's what we'll try to discuss and we'll try to understand in today's webinar. So let's get it started with the speaking. In speaking, basically, you have only three criteria. There are 5 types of questions, and you have only 3 criteria. The first criteria is content, which means how well you understood the task and responded to the task with an appropriate response. And the fluency and pronunciation, on the other hand, are individual characteristics of the presentation. So how well you could present the answer you knew. Which means if I know how to answer the question, but if I have not worked on my presentation skill, then in that case, I might lose a lot of points. On the other hand, let's say that I know how to speak English and I know how to pronounce the word and what fluency I should speak or what fluency actually is, but I'm not that sure about the content, then in that case also, I might not get the score I'm looking for. So in speaking, if you want to score higher, you have to have a balance between all these 3 elements. You need to know what kind of content you require or how content is evaluated in every question type. Then after that, you have to know how fluency needs to be maintained, what is fluency and how it needs to be maintained. And then at the end, you also have to know about the pronunciation, how to pronounce the words and what happens if your pronunciation is not correct, or which kind of words you really need to learn to pronounce well, and so on. So let's go through the questions one by one now. The first question in your test in speaking is read aloud. This is one of the most misunderstood questions, as well as the question which has a lot of importance because it gives a score for speaking and at the same time for reading as well. In read aloud, you are asked to read something on the screen. And for many of us, it's a very simple task because we just have to look at the screen and read whatever is there. But one thing we misunderstand here is in this task, we are supposed to convey the message that we are reading by understanding and not by just by repeating the information on the screen. So how is that possible? Or in other words, how can we convince this algorithm that we are reading in the right way so that we should get good score for our speaking as well as for our reading? Now, that's one place where some of us misunderstand, and then we focus too much on fluency and too much in pronunciation and forget about the content. Let's talk about the scoring first, and then I will tell you what happens when you read in different ways or how you may lose a score or may gain a score in the test. The content part is quite important, but remember, in the content part, if you focus too much, you might lose a score in fluency and pronunciation. At the same time, fluency and pronunciation together contribute 10 points, but the content is also important because from there also you get points. And especially in this question, it's important because here the score in content depends on the length of the text. So all these elements are equally important. So let's talk about the mistakes that can reduce our score. In content in particular, 3 types of mistakes can reduce our score. And those 3 types of mistakes are, I think someone has just joined us. Let's admit them as well. So the 3 types of mistakes that can reduce our score are first, deletion, second, addition, and third, false start. So what are these things? Deletions, additions, and false start. Deletion means while reading, if you miss a word on the screen, that is considered deletion. So for example, I'm reading the first text box here, which says content depends on the length of the text. And if I say content depends on length of text, I missed the in both the lines, and that means I have deleted the word and I'm going to lose points. And if it keeps happening, this keeps adding up, and then at the end I might lose a lot of points. But at the same time, if it happens in just, let's say, in one sentence or in one question, it's not much of a problem. So in the larger scheme of things, what it means is you don't need to be overly engrossed about every single mistakes you might make or missing every single word. But at the same time, what you need to know is, you have to make sure that you can say all the words you see on the screen as much as possible. Now, in doing that, what can be the challenge? One of the common challenges that people often share with me is, what if I see a word which I'm sure I'm not able to pronounce, or I will not be able to pronounce? What should I do? Because if I will try to pronounce that word, I might have problem with my fluency, or I might lose a score in pronunciation as well, because I know I will not be able to pronounce the word. In that case, what I suggest is, if it is happening in just one or two questions, you can simply skip that word and keep speaking as if the word was not even there. As an example, if I'm reading this first text box and if I feel like I can't pronounce the word the in the first line, I can simply say content depends on length of the text, like this. This is just an example, but I hope it has given you an idea. The only thing that I'm saying is you have to be careful about not doing this too many times, because it will establish a pattern. And whenever you establish a pattern, it's very easy for the algorithm to find out that you have problems with such kind of words, and then it can have negative impact on your overall score. Then the next part is fluency. In fluency, maximum you can get 5, but how can you lose points in fluency? There are many ways by which you can lose points in fluency, and it will not be possible to cover all of them. But there is one important thing that you should always remember, and that is, at any cost, avoid long pauses. Any long pause can reduce your score severely, and in fact, out of 5, your score will straight away drop to 2 if you make long pauses. And if it keeps happening, then you will lose your score in fluency dramatically. And despite being a good speaker in your test, you may not be able to get the score you desire. In read aloud, it's less likely to happen, but in other questions like retell, lecture, and describe image, which we'll be discussing shortly, it's very likely to happen if you don't have a plan. So for fluency, or for the score in fluency, make sure that at any cost you avoid the long pauses. That's really important. Now, what is the other thing? The other thing is your pronunciation score. The pronunciation score, you get 5 for not making any mistakes in pronunciation. And there is also a little bit of confusion among people. Not making any mistake, does it mean that absolutely no mistakes, or it means if I make a few mistakes, it will be all right? And what about those people who have different types of pronunciation compared to the native speakers? For example, I'm a non-native speaker. My pronunciation is not like the native speaker. But what happens if I speak in the exam? How will they know whether I'm speaking the right way or not? Especially because these exams are designed by native speakers. So how will they be able to understand our way of speaking? So in that case, what you need to know is Pearson has collected data from a large number of non-native English speakers, so they can pretty much understand a range of voices from different types of speakers from all over the world. So you don't really need to think about how native like you are, but what you need to remember is how to avoid the gross mistakes in pronunciations. Now, this is a part where you may have a confusion, because when I say gross mistakes in pronunciation, it pretty much depends on individuals. It depends on the person who makes these mistakes, because different people have different weaknesses, different problems, and depending on which country they are from and how they speak and how familiar they are with the language, they tend to make different kinds of mistakes. As an example, many people who come from the South Asian countries often find it difficult to pronounce the words with S, SH, R, words starting with SP. So I'm not saying that everyone has a problem, but mostly people have problem with this. And then we can see a similar thing with people coming from Russian countries, like, who have problems pronouncing R, or people from Japan and China who have problems pronouncing the letters like R and L. So you need to figure out these problems before you go to the exam. And one way your tutors can help you with your pronunciation is by helping you to understand which kind of consonants and vowels you tend to mispronounce, so that when you practice, you can be more aware of them and then work on those areas and get over them. But remember, you don't need accent. So if you have been living in an English speaking country, naturally you'll pick up a little bit of accent of that country, because you will try to learn by copying the way speakers speak in those countries, and that's fine. But you don't really need any accent to get higher score. You just need to make sure that you learn how to pronounce the words correctly. And for that matter, you learn how to intonate, how to stress, and how to maintain the rhythm. And those of you who are hearing these words for the first time, I suggest that you watch my video on YouTube where I have discussed these three parameters of speaking: intonation, rhythm, and stressing, and how we need to work on those areas. So basically, there are three criteria: content, fluency, and pronunciation. And especially from fluency and pronunciation, you get more score compared to content, because fluency and pronunciation together carry 10 points, and they depend on how familiar you are with the content and how smoothly you can speak. So these are the three criteria for reading loud. At the end of a speaking presentation, I'll also tell you how many points you'll get in speaking and how many points you'll get in reading. And if you have some questions that I have not answered yet, then keep that questions so that in the end of this session, we can discuss all your questions, all your concerns. Or if you feel like you might forget those questions, you can just take a note of that somewhere so that we can discuss those things at the end. I think that will be more useful, because I'll only be talking from my perspective and I may not be able to understand what your particular problems are. So I suggest you keep a note of all those things so that we can discuss at the end. Now let's go to the next question type: describe image. In describe image, same thing: content, fluency, pronunciation, 5 points each for all of them. But let me tell you one tip that you may not know before, and that tip is, in describe image, it's quite easy to get the score in content. I'm not talking about fluency and pronunciation, by the way, because fluency and pronunciation evaluation are done in the same way as it is done in read aloud. But for the content part, as long as you have covered all the information shown on the image, you'll get maximum points. So that means if in my answer I have included all the words like SFU, LSU, and then product A, B, and C, and then different bars given here, then I will get full points. And in cases where you might feel like you have nothing to talk about, in such cases you can talk about colors. And if it's about some kind of images which are showing let's say a house, a mountain, in such cases you can even talk about shape, size, texture, location, and those kind of things as well. So remember, this question is called describe image for a reason. That is, you are asked to describe what you see rather than analyze what it means. Many times, many people get stuck in these types of questions and can't speak continuously and smoothly because they tend to analyze. Analysis requires more time, and then that can compromise your fluency. So rather than focusing too much on what to say, just say what you see on the screen. For this, try to use some kind of templates and organize a structure which tells you how to go about describing images. As an example, in our classes, our template addresses 4 different parameters of any image. We start with the title, then after that we talk about the information we see on the image, then we talk about something that we found interesting, and then we conclude by summarizing the content of the image. So this kind of structured approach makes it more predictable and easier for you to discuss things smoothly. So in describe image, fluency and pronunciation principles are similar to what we discussed in read aloud. But for the content part, do not overthink and do not analyze. Just describe what you see on the image. The next question type is retell lecture. This is another important question. Now in retell lecture, what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to retell a lecture you heard, and then for that you'll be evaluated for both your listening skill as well as for your speaking skill. Now speaking part, I think most of us can understand because we have to speak, but why listening, and how do they know whether we have appropriately understood the lecture or not? So what they do is they try to analyze the content by looking at some of the keywords you grabbed from the lecture. So as long as you have keywords from the 3 parts of the lecture, for example, from the beginning, from the middle, and from the end, then you tend to get maximum score. So in other words, when you are listening to lecture, try to grab as many keywords as you can from the first 1/3, then the middle 1/3, then the last 1/3. Now use these keywords as 3 sentences in your answer, and make sure that your answer is organized and you have a consistent pattern so that in the exam you do not need to think much about how to present. As an example, you might start by saying what this lecture is about. Your first sentence can simply say this lecture was about whatever it is. And then after that, you can just discuss those groups of keywords you got from the 3 different parts of the lecture. So you might say, in the beginning of the lecture, whatever the speaker discussed in the middle of the lecture and at the end of the lecture. And then at the end, just give a summary of everything. Overall, the lecture was about this, and this is what the speaker was trying to do. So this way you will cover all the information without thinking too much about what could be the implication of what the lecturer was saying. And again, remember, they're not asking you to analyze the lecture. They're simply saying retell lecture. And again, remember, summarize the lecture and retell the lecture. If they have asked us to summarize the lecture, then the expectations would have been different. It would involve listening to the lecture, getting the information, and then interpreting the information or analyzing the information in our words. But retell a lecture means whatever you heard, just say it. You don't have to really understand what it meant, but you must be able to say what you listened to. Okay, so in order to do that, just try to grab as many keywords as you can from first 1/3, middle 1/3, and last 1/3, so that you can organize that information as I suggested. For the fluency in pronunciation, as I told you in Read Aloud, make sure that you can speak smoothly, and for that, use the organization structure that I suggested. And for the pronunciation, make sure that you can pronounce most of the commonly used words in English without much problem. Take help of your tutors or your friends to identify the kind of mistakes you tend to make so that you can work on them. Now, the next question type is, I think I skipped one question here, maybe repeat sentence. Okay, let me have a look. Yeah, so I think repeat sentence slide for some reason is not here, but let me tell you verbally as well. Repeat sentence is similar to all the other questions we discussed so far. This question also has 3 criteria, and these 3 criteria are content, fluency, and pronunciation. But this is the only question where Pearson has clearly told that you do not need to have a very good content as long as you can present well. And what that means is this is the only question where you get 3 points for content, but 5 points for fluency and 5 points for pronunciation, which means how you say the sentence is more important than what you say. And what that means is, I think someone is asking something here. There is a question about retell lecture here. I think I'll just finish about repeat sentence and then I'll answer this question. So as I was telling you about repeat sentence, your fluency and pronunciation are more important than your content, because you get 3 points for the content, but you get 5 points for fluency and 5 points for pronunciation. Now let's think about one problem that we almost all of us face in the exam, and that includes me as well. I have been to this exam 7 times, and not in all the exams I was able to repeat all the sentences without any problem. Sometimes I would get distracted and then I would not be able to repeat the sentences well. But despite that, I have never scored less than 90. And from these experiences, as well as from my experience of the mock test, the experiments I have done with the Pearson's official mock test, what I know is, as long as most of your sentences have been repeated well, you do not need to worry much about the total score you get. And even in individual sentences, you get 3 points maximum for repeating the sentence. But let's say that you can't repeat the full sentence, you can still get 2 or 1 points in the content, provided that you are able to remember either more than 50% of the sentence or less than 50% of the sentence. So let's say that there is a sentence with 8 words. If I repeat 8 out of 8 words, I'll get 3. But if I repeat 7 out of 8 words, then I'll get 2. And if I repeat 4 out of 8 words, then also I'll get 2. So my tip for this kind of questions is, in repeat sentence, especially for those of you who are not that good with short-term memory and who are not familiar with the language, deliberately try to repeat only half of the sentence, because that way it will be easier for you. So if you hear the sentence, if you are not able to attend the class tomorrow, please advise your supervisor accordingly. Now, let's say that I feel this sentence is very long, then I will just say, please advise your supervisor accordingly, because I know now I have repeated at least 50%, and if not, at least I'll get 1 point, even if it's less than 50%. But I was able to speak quite smoothly and clearly, for which I'll get 5 out of 5 in both fluency and pronunciation. So that is the trick we use all the time in repeat sentence, which helps us in getting the score we desire. Of course, fluency and pronunciation are still important, and of course you need to pronounce all the words correctly and have to have good fluency, but don't get caught up with content that much, because that way you will perhaps hesitate because you will not know what to say, or if you forget something, you will be too stressed about it and you'll miss the main point, that is getting a score from fluency and pronunciation. So that's a really important thing for you to remember in repeat sentence. And another thing is, Remember, all students, we have trained more than 10,000 students in the last 5 years, and out of them, many students have, thousands of students have scored more than 79. Almost all of them have told me that they struggle in repeat sentence. They struggle in repeat sentence. They can't repeat the whole sentence. They sometimes miss this word, sometimes miss that word, and rarely they get all the words in a sentence correct, especially only if the sentence is short. Otherwise, in long sentences, almost all of them have told me that they struggle. What that means is, it's not that important for you to get the whole sentence right and get whole words correct. So focus on the meaning of the sentence and try to repeat as much of the sentence as you can, but try to do it smoothly and clearly. Now, coming back to the question that one of you had asked, if I cover direct 2 to 3 lines, can I get full marks in listening section? So I think what you are trying to ask here is, what if I just memorize 2 sentences from Retell lecture and then say it? So if you remember, I told you in Retell lecture, it's important for you to get information from 3 parts of the recording, from the beginning, from the middle, from the end, because usually, and this is how content is developed, you have a start, you have a description, and you have the end. Think about the essays we write. If someone asks you how essays are written, perhaps you'll say that essays are written by writing introduction, body, and conclusion. This is how most of the times any content is explained. You introduce the content, and then you explain the content, and then you conclude the content. And that is the reason why, if you want to summarize something well, try to get something from the beginning, something from the middle, and something from the end. And that way you will be able to capture most of the information. So if you only try to grab 1 or 2 sentences as it is from the recording, most likely you'll not be able to do this, and you will not get the score that you desire. If you are looking for only, let's say, more than 50, you might be able to get that, or even more than 65, but 79 will be a problem, especially because the score in listening depends on your score in Retell lecture. And we'll talk about that shortly. So the last question type now is short answer question. This is not a really important question. And in this question, the only thing they're trying to test is your vocabulary. So this is the only question in your test where your fluency and pronunciation are not directly measured. Fluency is not measured at all because the questions can be answered in 1 word as well. And unless we have 2 words at least, we can't think of the concept of fluency anyway. But about the pronunciation, although they do not give you any score for pronunciation, it can still be important because the technology they employ to evaluate you is called speech to text. So that means you have to say something and that word has to be transcribed. And if you are not speaking clearly, they will not be able to write the correct word. And that way, even if you are saying the right thing, you may not get the score. Okay, so it's very important. As an example, this is something that happened in our class. The question was, which month comes after January? And the answer most of the people gave were February. Now, that was the wrong pronunciation of the word because it should have been pronounced as February. And because everyone is saying February, that was not being captured by the system. It was writing something else. And nobody was getting the points for that. So be careful about this as well. You might feel like these questions are quite easy and most of the times they repeat. But again, how you say these words is more important than what you're saying. Because at the end of the day, the word needs to be captured in the right way. So overall in speaking, for those of you who are struggling here, what can be my message? What can be my recommendation? Learn how to structure your answer so that you don't need to think about it much. Second, I think someone is trying to join here. So first thing, as I said, try to make a structure for your answer, especially for describe image in Retell lecture, so that you don't need to think about the content much. For questions like repeat sentence and read aloud, be careful about the content, but especially in repeat sentence, don't get too much engrossed with the content and try to repeat as much as you can without thinking much about whether you missed something or not. And in read aloud, be careful about not skipping the word or not adding the words. And then more importantly, work on your fluency and pronunciation. Most of us, because we are non-native speakers, we tend to have some problems with our pronunciation compared to fluency. And that is one of the reasons why many people get 90 out of 90 in speaking, but struggle with their reading and listening, because the score in reading and listening depends on the score you get from content in speaking. So I might be able to get a good score in speaking by focusing on my fluency or by just repeating the content I heard. But if the content is not relevant or appropriate or at the level they expect, then I may not get a score in reading and listening. So in order to achieve your targeted score, sit down with your tutor and then ask them, how do I work on my intonation? How do I work on my stress pattern? How do I maintain the rhythm while answering the question? And lastly, and more importantly, did it make sense when I said something? Did I say all the words correctly or not? And if not, which types of words, not which word, by the way, one word doesn't matter. Which types of words I tend to mispronounce? Do I mispronounce the words starting with ST? Do I mispronounce the words ending with ED? Do I mispronounce the word which have STS at the end? These are the kind of information you need from your tutor so that you know whether you are establishing any pattern of error or not, and if yes, how you can work on that pattern and then avoid it in the exam. Okay, now the next point is how the score in speaking can influence your score in reading and listening. So let's have a look at that as well. So this is how the speaking score is distributed across different sections. We can see here that a speaking score, repeat sentence contributes 32 points, read aloud 22 points, describe image 22 points, retell lecture 11 points, and answer short question 3 points only. So repeat sentence is the most important question here. Read aloud and describe image both are equally important, carrying 22 points each, and retell lecture has the half the importance of read aloud or describe image, and answer short question is the least important question. When you are practicing or preparing for your exam, start with repeat sentence. Make sure that you can repeat as much of the sentence as you can, but don't get caught up with the content too much. And then for read aloud and describe image, for read aloud, be familiar with the commonly asked words and learn how to pronounce them and learn intonation, rhythm, and pronunciation tricks. For describe image, create a pattern or template for yourself and stick to that. For retell lecture, try to grab keywords from all the three parts of the recording. For answer short question, do not spend too much time on this question. If you have time, start working on other questions, and if you still have time, then you can practice these questions. So these are the 5 questions from which you are getting score in speaking. But remember, in speaking is the only section in your test which contributes a score to listening and reading, but is not affected by any other section. That is one of the reasons you'll find many people who score 19 in speaking but struggle with other sections. All right. Now, speaking also affects writing and reading. Listening and reading. So how do listening and reading get a score from speaking? That's something we'll discuss when we'll discuss reading and listening. But before I start talking about writing, if you have any questions, please write in the chat box so that I can answer those questions, and then we'll move on to writing part. So I'm waiting for your questions now. Okay, I'll go one by one here. If I make any mistake on one question, will my fluency affect the whole speaking task? No. If you make mistake in one question, that is not going to affect your whole task. In order to understand why, you first have to understand how the overall scoring is done in different sections of PT as well as in the entire PT. PT calculation of a score is not done arithmetically, where we just add the scores together and then get the average. It's not done in that way. What they actually do is, in order to calculate your score, they first find out if there is any outlier or not. What that means is, let's say that in all the 5 questions you did, in all the 5 questions your fluency was 90 out of 90, but in the 6th question suddenly your fluency was only 30. They simply ignore that question because otherwise the average value will be distorted just because of one accidental mistake. And that's why in PT, it is very common for people to say the story that they were not able to answer one question, they did not do well in one sentence, and still they managed to get 90. This is the reason. Outliers should always be ignored when you are trying to get the average of anything. An example that I often use in the class is, let's say that there are 10 students in a class. 9 students are just the average students with average income, and the 10th student is, let's say, Bill Gates. And if we calculate the average income of the class, now the average income will be much higher than the individual income of the students. The only way we can find out what is the average income of the student is we have to ignore Bill Gates, because he is an outlier. His value is too different than the value of the individual members. And that's exactly what they do in your exam. And that is one of the reasons why you do not need to worry too much if you don't do well in one particular question. But if you have a pattern, if you have a pattern of making mistakes, then you need to be concerned. And usually people have pattern. Even those who say that I did not make many mistakes, I found many times that usually their problem is a particular type of word, a particular type of letter, or a particular problem with their intonation pattern or their rhythm. The next question is 50% repeat sentences enough for 65? Yes, it is enough. If you can repeat 50%, it's enough. But remember, when I'm saying that, what I'm also assuming is you don't have problem in all the sentences, because in your exam, if you get 10 sentences, around 5 sentences will be short, around 3 sentences will be average length, and around 2 sentences will be long. Usually people have problems with the long sentences. So let's say that 5 short sentences you could do without any problem, but in the next 3 average length sentences and the next 2 long sentences you had problem. In such cases, if your target score is only 65 and above, you do not need to worry at all. You'll easily get your score. Then the next question is, if I do not know the answer of short answer question, what should I do? If you do not know the answer of short answer question, you have 2 options. First, you can ignore the question completely because it carries only 3 points. Otherwise, you can simply repeat the question you heard. These are the only tricks you have. Remember, in any other way, you cannot get points for what you say. You get points for your answer only if the word you used in your answer matches with what they have in the database. Sometimes one question can have more than one possible answers, and then in such cases, all the answers are accepted. But remember, if you do not know the answer, either try repeating the question you heard or simply go to the next question. Then, do I need to speak something like I do not know or just leave? You can simply leave the question if you do not know anything at all, or you can try because there is no negative marking anyway. And another thing is, sometimes in some of the answer short questions, you may not know the answer immediately. In such cases, you can say, okay, let me think about the answer. This is an interesting question. I guess the answer to this question is, I think the answer is, you can use this kind of expressions without any penalty. Okay, so you can do this as much as you like. And you can also change your answer if you are not happy with the answer, as long as you have time. Pearson has clearly mentioned in the score guide that you're allowed to change your answer as many times as you like in this question, especially because there is no score for fluency and pronunciation here, and it's only about the content. And because the content actually depends on what you say, it doesn't matter whether you say it in 1 attempt or 10 attempts. Do I need to speak something? Sorry, that question I have already answered. Okay. Whether grammar influence my speaking, for example, singular, plural, saying the past, present, and future incorrectly. Now, this is the most interesting thing about your test. If you look at the entire scoring criteria, nowhere Pearson has clearly mentioned anything about grammar. They have only said that you'll be validated for your fluency, for your pronunciation, and for your content. Now, we know that sometimes what we say in the content and its legibility, that means whether someone can understand this or not, depends on how well we say it. Otherwise, the content itself is not important. So the grammar of the content is not an important concern, should not be an important concern for anyone. Try your best to speak as clearly as you can. But if you make some small mistakes, like you mentioned something in past, although you wanted to do that in present, you said it in plural, although that should have been singular, don't worry too much about it. The only place where singular, plural, past, present will make more difference is read aloud, because there every replacement is considered one mistake. So if you replace the past with present, that will be considered a mistake. If you replace singular with plural, that will be considered a mistake. So in read aloud, it's important, and other questions, do not worry much. Okay, so these are the questions we got about speaking from you, and I think I have answered most of these questions. Let's go to writing. If you still have any questions, you can ask me those questions at the end. About writing, we have only 2 different types of questions in writing. The first one is summarized written text, and it has 4 different criteria. Among those criteria, the only thing I think that you need to pay attention to is content. The content that you get from the passes, you have to be careful about what you are getting from the passes. So learn how to get the sentence of each paragraph. Try to get the important sentences from each paragraph, and most likely that will be the first sentence. But sometimes it will not be the case. In such cases, read the paragraph and try to get at least one idea from each paragraph. So in your exam, if you get a passage with multiple paragraphs, you are in luck, because in such cases, the examiner has indirectly told you already that it has two main ideas or three main ideas. The reason I'm saying that is, if you get a passage with three paragraphs, that means there are three main ideas, two paragraphs, two main ideas, and so on. After that, form is only about the length. The only mistake people make here is sometimes they confuse this question type with summarize spoken text, and they end up writing more than one sentence. Just make sure that you have not written more than one sentence. Now, this is something many of you may not know. If you get 0 in content or 0 in form, you get overall 0 in the entire question type. These are two barriers in your evaluation. You have to get at least 1 in content and at least something in form, because you get only 1 point. So that means you have to get score in form. Anyone who answers the questions in more than one sentence, or anyone who writes about something not in the passes, or write about something completely different than in the passes, they will get 0 overall for the question, not just for that particular criteria. So be careful not to add anything from your side, and also be careful in picking up the information only from the passes. If you have used any tricks such as memorizing an answer which is completely different than the passes, it's not going to work. Grammar and vocabulary. If you want to avoid grammar and vocabulary mistakes and want to get 2 out of 2 in both of these criteria, try to get the information from the passes and then just slightly modify the information so that you don't make any mistakes in grammar and vocabulary. How much of the passes can you copy? That's a very common question I get. That depends on the type of the passes you are dealing with. In most of the cases, you will not be penalized much if you use some of the words from the passes. That is one of the reasons why you can see in the scoring criteria, there is no score for spelling. Unlike in summarize spoken text, which despite being a similar question type, gives you score for spelling as well. But here you do not get a score for spelling. Why? Because you are allowed to copy the information from the passes. So if someone can write something, it can be either because they knew how to spell the word, or it can be just because they copied the word from the passes. So don't worry too much about paraphrasing. Just get the information from the passes. Make sure that information is relevant and important information. Try to answer your sentence. Try to write your answer in one sentence. And then grammar and vocabulary score you can maximize by minimally altering the structure of the sentence you got from the passes. Just change a few words here and there as much as possible. Do not touch keywords. Let them as it is. Let them be as it is, so that the algorithm can clearly identify that you understood the answer and you wrote it in your way. And again, here also you can use some templates so that you can always connect your ideas together. Because as I told you, you cannot write more than one sentence, but sometimes you might be picking up 3 different sentences from 3 different places, which need to be connected using appropriate linking words. Because if the linking words are not appropriate, you will lose points in grammar. In order to do well in this section, it's better to use a template, which we do in our class. So those of you who are our students, currently enrolled students, just use the template we have given you in the class. And for the others, try to create a fixed type of answer. And if you are not sure whether you are doing it in the right way or not, ask someone who has good command over the language to check your answer and find out whether your structures are correct or not. Once you find that the structure is correct, only replace the sentences, but let the rest of the structure be same. You will not be losing anything. The next question type here is essay. Essay is, I think, one of those few questions about which many people get scared, because in many types of exams like TOEFL, GRE, IELTS, essay is the most difficult question. And because of essay, many people struggle to get a score in writing. Fortunately, in PTE, essay is not the most important question in writing. But we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. What are the criteria for essay evaluation? Let's talk about that first. There are 7 criteria, starting with content. First, write relevant content, and if you can do that, you'll get 3 points. how can the algorithm know that you have written relevant information only? The algorithm will check all the questions asked, and based on that will analyze the entire text you have written and will find out the density of keywords related to the question asked. So let's say that if I'm asking a question about, do you think dangerous sports be allowed? What can be the advantages of allowing dangerous sports? So the keywords here would be dangerous sports and some of the advantages related to that. So unlike humans, it cannot identify or pinpoint whether you actually wrote about that question or not. But if it can finds that you have written something about dangerous sports and some of the words you have written are related to the advantages of dangerous sports, and they are coming in the same order as it usually comes in case of other people's writing, then they will give you maximum score for content. So content, don't get overly engrossed with the content, just make sure that it's relevant. For the 6 other criteria, you get 2 points each. For content, you get 3. Some people might feel like, okay, that means content is more important, but how I put this is content is the least important criteria here, because the other 6 criteria only depend on how you write your answer. Content depends on what you know about the question. So in other words, how you write is more important than what you write. You may not know everything about the question, and let's say that because of that you get only 2 out of 3, but if you know how to say what you know, you'll get 12 out of 12 from the remaining criteria, and that will make it 14 out of 15 in your essay writing. So focus more on presentation, not on the content. Now let's talk about the easy criteria in essay writing first. The easy criteria are form, because it means simply whether you wrote 200 to 300 words or not. Spelling, it only means whether you made any spelling errors or not. You can easily get 2 out of 2 here by not writing the words you don't know how to spell and editing or proofreading your work once you finish it. Then logical development, organization, and coherence, you can get maximum score from this one if you use some kind of template provided to you by institutions. If you can get maximum score from these areas, from the rest, it is quite easy to get the score as long as you keep your answer simple. For grammar and vocabulary, you don't need to use any complicated structures. Just make sure that you avoid any major mistakes. You can try some simple structures. Don't try to repeat the same type of sentences all the time. Try to change the sentence length and the complexity level, but try to make it as easy as possible, as simple as possible. If you do that, then you can get the maximum score for essay as well. So the maximum score is 15, and the tips for getting 15 out of 15 is: first, answer all the question asked. Second, make sure that you have written between 200 to 300 words. Third, proofread your work and do not write any word which you are not confident to spell. Grammar and vocabulary, get maximum score here by not trying out any complex structures that you do not know how to write, and any complex vocabularies that you are not confident of. And for the linguistic diversity, keep changing the length and structure type of the sentences, then you will easily get the score here. Now, just like summarize written text, here also there are 2 barriers. In order to be evaluated for your essay, first you have to get some point for the content. Second, your answer must be more than 120 words and not more than 380 words. More than 380, I think, is not a problem, but try to make sure that you have written more than 120, and then you will be evaluated for the rest of the things. You will get at least a few points. Okay, so how does writing affect other sections, and how do you get to score in writing? Let's have a look at that as well. Interestingly, the maximum amount of a score in writing actually comes from write from dictation, which is a question type in listening, from where you get around 27 points. And then the next important question for writing is reading and writing fill in the blanks, from which you get 22 points. And then summarize spoken text is the next important question, which is in the 3rd place with 12 points. Essay and summarize written text, these are the 2 question types you do in writing, are actually only 3rd and 4th important question in writing. So if you want to get good score in writing, focus more on dictation and reading and writing fill in the blanks. They are more important for you. It's important for you to learn how to write essay or how to summarize the written text, but if you spend too much time just in essay writing, which many students do, then most likely you will struggle with your writing all the time. Fill in the blanks in listening is another question which gives you score for writing. Okay, now we have covered the writing part. If you have any questions about writing, again, you can write in the chat. So if you have any questions, please write in the chat and I'll try to answer them. So here is a question from Venkatesh, and he's asking, grammar in summarized written text. I can see 2 points for it, but how is it calculated? So as I told you, the calculation for the grammatical points is, first, if you have not made any major mistakes in grammar, you get 2 points. That means if you make simple mistakes like missing s at the end, or wrong form of the verb, or missing a preposition, or no article, in such cases you will not lose any point at all. But if you make major errors, for example, wrong tense, wrong voice, wrong subject verb agreement, or mistakes because of which it is difficult to understand what you're trying to say, in such cases you will lose points, and depending on how many of those mistakes you make, you might even get 0 in grammar. But remember, even if you get 0 in grammar, you can still get a score from the other 6 criteria, which means even a person with really bad grammar or with major problems in grammar theoretically can get 13 out of 15 in your exam. Although we all know that if grammar is that bad that you cannot even get 1 point, most likely you'll have problem in other areas as well. Okay, how many words are enough for essay? Now, theoretically, you can write anywhere from 200 to 300, but I recommend writing around 220 to 250 for 2 reasons. First, if you write less, you'll have more time for editing or proofreading your work. Second, writing too much usually means more chances of mistakes as well. So it's not a good idea. And I have found that most people who get good score usually write between 220 to 250. The next question is, my writing score is not improving. I'm struggling with reading, writing blanks. Right from dictation is not too bad, and I'm able to cover 70 to 80%. Okay. I do not know how much a score you are looking for, but if you're looking for more than 79, then right from dictation must have more than 90% accuracy. 70 to 80 will not be enough for more than 79. Second, reading and writing blanks questions. In order to excel in this type of the question or get better score in this type of question, you have to make sure that you are familiar with the academic word list, which has 570 words. And second, you are familiar with the collocation list published by Pearson, which has around 2,500 collocations. You can download both of this from our website. If you go to the free PTE material section, then at the top you'll find this word list. You can get the word list from there. So go through those lists, which will help you to get better score. Now, another thing is, I'm also thinking of sharing with you all of you who participated in today's discussion, the past exam questions, which are likely to appear in December exam. For that, you just have to join our Facebook group, because I'll be sharing these questions on our Facebook group. Just go to Facebook, find the Facebook group PT Tutorial Videos by Roman PT. There I'll be sharing a few past questions that I think are likely to come in your exam, especially the reading questions, because the other questions usually, whether they repeat or not, doesn't matter much. But in reading, especially in filling the blanks reading and writing, if you get the question you have already tried, it saves you a lot of time, and I think your accuracy also improves. All right, so that's about writing. We are supposed to do it for 1 hour, but I think I have already used almost 1 hour now. Now I have only 5 minutes. Okay, I think I'll have to do it second. I will have to do the second episode as well, because I still need to discuss reading and listening, and I can't do that in 5 minutes, of course. Let me summarize what I told you about speaking and writing, especially those of you who may have problem in speaking and writing. And don't worry if your concern is reading or listening, because I'm soon going to do a free webinar for that as well, and you can register for that for free. But let me summarize the main points for speaking and writing. If you are struggling with your speaking score, remember, it is not usually because of what you say, it's usually because of how you say it. So work on your fluency and work on your pronunciation. Usually non-native speakers have problem with their pronunciation more than their fluency. So work on your pronunciation. And remember, pronunciation does not mean how you say a word. It means how you say a sentence. And that involves your stress, your intonation, your rhythm. And you also need to learn about connected speech. For the next writing question, if you want to get good score in writing, stop spending too much time on essay writing and summarize written text, but rather spend more of your time on write from dictation and reading and writing, fill in the blanks, because together these two questions carry almost half of your writing score. In fact, more than half of your writing score. And without getting that score, you'll never be able to get the score you want. So these are two important things for you to remember. If you have any other questions which I could not answer because of the limited time we had today, please write in the Facebook group comment section, and I'll be more than happy to answer all your questions there as well. And if you need more face-to-face, more personalized help, then we have got some paid courses as well, which you can find on our website. If you go to romanpt.com, and if you go to the PTE online section, you can find some of the courses we offer to students all over the world. So you can check those options as well. That's it for today. For the next webinar, I'll soon post a link on our Facebook group. Please register when you have time. Those of you who attended today's webinar, thank you for your time. I hope it was useful for you. Let me know by sending me an email if you found everything useful, and if you did not like something, also you can send me an email, and I'll try to work on those areas as well. All the best for your upcoming exam, and that's it for today. Thank you.